Today is November 30th. It's 1 o'clock Eastern time. This is time for our Greek studies. So we're going to pick up where we left off before Thanksgiving break. We're going to do some grammar work today, and then we'll spend the rest of our time finishing lesson 3 of Greek reading. Last time we had a class, we did some translation work. We worked on verses 11 to 13 in chapter 1 of the Gospel of John. We'll review that a little bit because I don't expect it to be fresh in your memory, and then we'll finish verses 14 and 15. But first, I want to start taking some time to discuss Greek grammar and start learning the forms so we can look for them in our readings, all right? So that's what we're going to do today. We're just going to get into it because there's not a whole lot of introduction needed here. So let me share my screen, and I'm going to share a look at the Greek grammar textbook. And don't get stressed out if you can't read this. I'm going to talk about it, so just relax. All right, so on the screen here, you can see our Greek grammar textbook and lots of forms of Greek words. Again, don't stress if you can't read that. It's okay. I can zoom in a little bit, but it's really not going to help us because of what I want to talk about anyway. When we talk about the parts of speech, we say that some of the parts of speech are declined and some of the parts of speech are not declined. Does anybody know what that means? What does it mean that some of the parts of speech are declined and some of the parts of speech are not declined? What does that mean in grammar? What does that mean? Anybody know what that means? What does it mean for parts of speech to be declined or not declined? What does that mean? Come on, help me out here. Anybody know what that means? We just have a bunch of beginners here. I'll explain it so it's no big deal. All right, well, what it means is that some parts of speech have different forms. That's what it means to be declined. Okay, yeah. I thought I heard some crickets in the background. But some of the parts of speech have different forms. That's what it means to be declined. And then there are other parts of speech that do not have different forms. There's just one word. For example, conjunctions. Follow me here. For conjunctions, we have Greek words like kai, right? It means and. There's just one form. If you look it up in the dictionary, that's the word. There's no other forms. It's just one word. So some of the parts of speech are not declined. They only have one form. And really, to learn those parts of speech, it's just a vocabulary study. You just have to study the words, and that's all there is to know. But other parts of speech, nouns, verbs, participles, pronouns, they have lots of different forms. So we say that they're declined. That means they have different forms. So in order for us to understand the language, we've got to learn these declensions. We've got to learn about all these different forms of words in Latin and Greek. So if I show you the text of our reading lesson, you know, we can read this and we can use the lesson to tell us what the words mean. But you don't understand why they mean what they mean. You can't tell if what I say, you know, if down in the exposition I tell you that this word means this and this word means this, you have no idea if I'm right or wrong. I could be a con man that's just like pulling a gag on everybody, pretending I know the answers. And you guys are learning this stuff, writing it in quizzes, you know, and I could just be making up. You have no way to tell if I'm even right. So you're just studying the expositions, learning what I say, trusting that I have any clue what I'm talking about, and repeating that on the assessments. Well, I wouldn't like it to go on like that forever, and I'm pretty confident that I do actually know these things, and I'd like you to see that. So what we're going to start doing is learning the forms of the words so you can understand what's actually going on and why the translation is what it is. You also need to know the forms in order to know what to look up in a dictionary. If you don't know the declensions, you'll see words sometimes like, if I were to show you a word like aelthen here in verse 11, if you were to take that word aelthen, if you didn't know what that word meant and you pull out a Greek dictionary, I have my dictionary today with me. You pull out a Greek dictionary, that word aelthen is not in the dictionary. So you're going to be out of luck. The only way you'd be able to find that in a dictionary is if you already know what verb it's a form of, and you know the basic forms of the verb, and then you can look up the basic forms in the dictionary. So with declined parts of speech, for many of them, if you don't know the declension, if you don't know the forms, you don't know where the words come from, you can't even look them up in a dictionary. So we've got to understand declension, or we're really in trouble. You're not going to have, I mean, the expositions are nice. That's like a luxury, but you're never going to have an exposition like this when you pick something else up to read, assuming you continue these studies. So we've got to learn these forms if we're going to learn the language. And my desire is to have you come to the point where you can look at my exposition, see what I write down here, and say, I actually understand why Mr. Michael wrote what he wrote. I understand why he said his own here for idioi. I understand why he said him instead of he. I understand why he did that. So in order to understand that, you've got to know the forms of the words and what they mean. So I'd like to take time during our weekly meetings to look at the forms and go through the grammar. Again, all of this is in your Greek grammar course. So if you're going to work through the Greek grammar course, and I've just got the first few lessons up for Greek grammar because we opened that course this year. Over Christmas break, I'll get a bunch more posted so we can continue next term. But I'd like to just take time in each of our live class meetings to go through the forms a little bit, okay, and explain things, and not just show you the forms in the grammar book, but then also go to our reading and show you some of these forms in our reading. It's not hard. Don't worry about it. Especially for you, Giovanni. You'll be fine. You can do this stuff. It's just like Latin. Just don't be intimidated by the different letters. But what I'd like to do most importantly is when we learn something in the grammar book, I'd like to actually show you where you've already seen that in your Greek reading, okay? So you can understand what's going on. So that's what we're going to do. We'll start doing that today. We'll spend a little time every week on grammar and then look at the reading, point out some of the examples of the grammar, and then do our translation work, all right? Now, what we're going to look at first, the first part of speech that we study are substantive nouns, which are just simple names for things. So we're going to study nouns first. And nouns are declined. So nouns, when we have a name for a thing, like if you point at something and say its name, that's the nominative form of that word. It's really not a case. It's really the word itself. It's the name. All right. So if I point at a tree, the name tree is the name for the tree, but there may be other forms. Like if I make it plural, I change it to trees. I add an S at the end, and that's an example of declension in English, because there really is no declension in English, just a little bit here and there. But in Greek, there's lots of declension, lots of different forms. But there's a name for a thing, which is its nominative form. That's the form you can look up in the dictionary. So if you know the nominative form, yeah, that's right. It only looks difficult because of the alphabet. But if you know the nominative form, you can look it up in the dictionary. If you don't know the nominative form, you can't find it in a dictionary. So that's why this is especially important. Once we learn the nominative form, we then have to study the different forms. And if we take all the Greek nouns, all the different nouns, there's a few families of nouns, and these are called declensions, okay? There's a few families, so you don't have to learn different forms for every single noun. There's just a few different sets of forms, a few different sets of endings that you have to learn, and that's it. Then you just have to, when you look at a noun, you just have to be able to identify which family it belongs to, and the endings for that family are the endings for that noun. So it's not like there's a million forms to learn. There's just a few different sets, and then all the nouns in Greek belong to one of those sets. So it's not really that complicated. So what we're going to look at today is just the first family, right? The first declension of Greek nouns. And at the top of the page here, ignore all this Greek jibber jabber. Just look up top here. You see that it's labeled first declension. So this is the first declension, the first family of Greek nouns. And then in parentheses, you see it says alpha stems, right? The Greek letter alpha stems. What that means is if we look at the stem of each of these nouns, it ends in alpha. And I'll zoom in a little bit, okay? So what these words have in common is the stem ends in alpha. You could see each of these words here, the stem ends in alpha. So that's the first family we're going to learn about. They're Greek nouns that have a stem that ends in alpha. And when we find nouns like this, they have the same endings. All right, so I'll show you this in the reading in a few minutes. I'll show you how to recognize one of these nouns. But when we see one of these nouns that belongs to this first declension, these nouns that have alpha stems, the alpha at the end of the stem, they're going to have the same endings or similar endings. Okay, so we're going to look at that together. So let me back up here and we'll see. So you can see there's two groups, right? We have the first declension, they're the alpha stems, and group number one are feminine nouns. So these nouns that are listed here are feminine. And then down on the next page, you'll see another chart, and you'll see group number two. These are masculine nouns, okay? They're also alpha stem nouns, nouns whose stem ends in alpha, the first declension of Greek nouns. So this is the family, this alpha stem family, all right? As we look at these words, let's just look at the words and make sure you can read them okay and know what they mean here, because this is like the beginning of some grammar vocabulary. The first word here is he kora. He kora. You can see chi, omega, rho, and alpha. It's unclear. It's an old book, but it's he. That's the article, and kora. He is a feminine article. So these are feminine nouns, remember? The first group is feminine, first declension nouns. And so they put the article here to show you that it's feminine. That's the feminine form of the article. Then you can see the noun kora. And at the end of this one, you can see that it ends in an alpha. So that's a sign that it belongs to the alpha stem family, or the first declension. All right, so he kora, and it means land. You can see the meaning here in italics. So kora means land. The next word is he nike. Nike. You see the consonant nu, and then iota, kappa, and eta. He nike. This is where the word Nike comes from. So Nike clothing, Nike shoes. It's this Greek word Nike, and it means victory. So that's what Nike means, like the goddess Nike, right? Athena Nike means Athenis, the goddess of victory. Okay. Yeah, so henike is a Greek word. It's where Nike comes from. It means victory. So it makes sense that if you want to make a sports clothing line, naming it Victory is a good idea, and giving it this cool name that nobody knows what it means, Nike, looks interesting, but it just means victory in Greek. But what you see here, this is a little different, so pay attention. The ending of this word actually doesn't have an alpha, all right? It has an eta. But if you look underneath it, we're told that the stem actually does end in alpha, and we're going to have to just get used to that. Remember that alpha can be lengthened into eta, and there's these changes in vowels and things like that. So don't get distracted. Henike is an alpha stem vowel, all right? And it means victory. Then we've got he fuge. He fuge. We've got phi, upsilon, gamma, and eta with an accent on the last syllable. He fuge. He shows that it's feminine. Fuge. And we see here in parentheses that it's an alpha stem noun. Then we've got he moira. He moira. Mu, omicron, iota, they're a diphthong. Rho, alpha. He moira. And we see moira is also an alpha stem. It means fate. So that's the Greek word for fate. Moira. And then lastly, heglota. Glota. We've got gamma, lambda, omega with a circumflex accent. So it goes o, glota, double tau, and then alpha. Glota. And we see that it's an alpha stem noun, alpha at the end of the stem. It means tongue, glotta, tongue. So a glossary, what is a glossary? It tells you how to pronounce the language, because the word language, if you think about it, a language can also be called a tongue, and that comes from the word glotta, which means tongue in Greek, glotta. All right, it's an alpha stem noun. So we've got these 5 first declension feminine nouns: hekora, henike, hefuge, hemoira, and heglota. First declension nouns. Let me ask you, how do I know that these are first declension nouns? How do I know that? Test number 1. Who's paying attention? How do I know that these are first declension nouns? What makes them first declension nouns? Nope. That's not right, Giovanni. Adel's right. I think it was Cecilia. Yep, Cecilia's right. Adel's right. The alpha stem, very good. Okay, what makes these first declension nouns is, if you look at the parentheses, they all have an alpha at the end of their stem. And it's also, note it's also a long alpha. So they're all alpha stem nouns. So if I say, how do we know these are first declension nouns? Serena's answer is the perfect answer, because of the alpha stem, okay? So this is what it means to be a first declension noun. Yeah, very good. Now, what we have underneath, and I'm going to back up here so you can see all this. What we have underneath are all the different forms of each of these nouns. And it looks like a ton of confusing stuff. And you could say, oh my goodness, how am I possibly going to learn all this stuff? It's very easy, because the forms are common for all 5 of the nouns. That's the whole point. There are some little differences, but once you see the differences, you realize, like, oh, that's not a big deal. Okay. It's not a lot of information, actually. They're just showing you the forms of actually 6 different nouns. Okay. I missed the last one here. Thalata. Thalata, that wasn't on the screen. That means the sea. So if we have, for example, we know what democracy is, right? Aristocracy, we hear about these things. What is a thalassocracy? What is a thalassocracy? The word thalata there on the page, power of the sea, yeah, control of the sea. So if a nation gains control of the sea, they're said to have a thalassocracy. Okay, it comes from the Greek word thalata or thalata. So that's another alpha stem noun. Okay, so let's look at these forms. On the left side over here, and again, I don't know how much grammar you've worked on yet, so I'm going to assume none, just for the sake of going over things. You see there's these 5 rows, and you've got these abbreviations. These are the different forms. So we have the nominative case, the genitive case, the dative case, the accusative case, and the vocative case. If you don't know what they are, just relax. You need to keep studying grammar, okay? But we'll see what they are when we look at our reading. But what we see is that there are 5 different forms, and these are all singular. You can see right here it says singular. So this is a chart right here. This chart right here shows the singular forms of these nouns, the singular forms of these first declension nouns. And the first form going across the row is the nominative form. These are the genitive forms, the dative forms, accusative forms, vocative forms. Now, what I want you to do is just follow across these lines. And what I want you to pay attention to is how they have their endings in common. So for example, kora ends in an alpha. Nike ends in an eta, but it has an alpha stem. So Nike actually ends in eta in the nominative case. Why in the world is it called an alpha stem if it ends in eta? Look down further to the other forms. You'll notice that there are alphas in the other forms. You see that? Those alphas in these other forms prove that Nike actually has an alpha stem, and that's why it has forms based on alpha. So some of these words like kora will have the nominative in alpha. Some, like Nike, will have the nominative in eta. Fuge also has eta. Moira ends in alpha. Glota ends in alpha. And thalata ends in alpha. So you can see that these are the same forms as the basic names themselves. That's the nominative form, the basic name. Then we go down to the genitive case and look across this row. Look across this row and tell me, what do these genitive forms have in common? What do you notice that's common to all these genitive forms? What do you notice? Very good. Okay. So you can see there's not 5 different things. There's not 6 different things. It's a very simple lesson to learn. The genitive singular case adds a sigma, right? It's a sigma in Greek. So if you see a first declension noun and it has a sigma at the end and it's singular, it's a genitive case, okay? So all you have to understand is the difference for the case, and you'll see that they all have it in common. So there's reason to it. It's not random information. So we have kora, the nominative form, and koras, the genitive form. We have nike, the nominative form, and nikes, that sigma says this is genitive. Fuge, fuges. Moira, moiras. Glota, glotes. Thalata, thalates. That sigma at the end marks the genitive case. Now let's look at the datives. What do you notice about these nouns in the dative case? What do they have in common? What do the dative case nouns have in common here? What to the dative case? Yeah, what is that called, right? It's not just a regular iota. What is that? Anyone remember what that's called? Iota subscript. Very good, Lara. Okay, so you can see it's not confusing. It's not confusing. There's a simple rule. The dative case simply adds a iota subscript instead of a sigma. So the sigma marks the genitive case. Iota subscript marks the dative case. Very good, okay? And you can look across the whole row and you can see that each form, each of the nouns has the iota subscript at the end of that form, okay? Simple yes or no. Is everyone following me so far? Is that pretty clear, easy to follow? You're seeing what I'm showing you, these forms, okay? So we've got this big ugly chart of all of these words, but if you learn what the chart is showing us, it's not very complicated. You need to know what to look for, okay? Let's go down to the accusative case. If you look across the accusative case row, what do you notice marks the accusative case? What marks the accusative case? The new, very good. Okay, very good. The new at the end. It looks like a V. I know some of you might have been confused as to what to write. You might have wanted to write the V, but that's the new. That's the letter new. Okay, so the new here, that letter new at the end marks the accusative case. All right, and you look across the whole row and you see koran, nikein, fugain, moiran, glotan, thalatan. All right, they all have that same new ending in common. That new marks the accusative case. And then lastly, if you look at the vocative, what do you notice about the vocative case? What do you notice about the vocative case? What do you notice about that last case, the vocative case? Take a look at it. What do you notice? There are not alphas in every one. Look carefully. Go across the whole row. Alpha is not right. What do you notice? Very good, Judah. It's the same as the top. That's right, Giovanni. It's the same as the top. So if you look at the nominative form, it's the same as the vocative. The nominative and the vocative forms are the same. All right. Now, that creates a problem, doesn't it? Because if we're looking at something that we're trying to read, and these two different cases have the same form, how in the world can we figure out what the right form is? How can we figure out how to translate it? What do you think the answer is to that? If these have the same form, even though they're different cases, how could we possibly figure out how to translate it? Very good, Lara. The context will tell us, okay? The context will tell us. The vocative case is used when we're talking to that person or that thing, all right? So if someone was talking to a tongue, as weird as that may sound, if someone was talking to a tongue and said, hey, tongue, come here, they would say glota, and we would know that that's vocative because it's being addressed, it's being spoken to directly, okay? So that's the actual difference. We would tell that by context. It's kind of weird, though, to think about the vocative case. No, I don't think so, Lara. It's kind of weird to have these examples because some of them are ridiculous, Like if you were talking to the sea, you would call it thalata. Kind of weird, but you understand what it's showing you. It's just showing you the forms, okay? If you ever did want to talk to a tongue, maybe you're standing in front of the mirror, looking at your tongue, and you'd like to address your tongue, you would use the vocative case, okay? So that's all right. But now that you look at this chart here, now what I'd like you to do, pay attention to me for a minute. Pay attention here. I know I'm often the cause of the distraction. I'll try to control myself. If you look at this chart here, originally this was very confusing, right? When you first looked at this, some of you said, oh my goodness, look how much there. Now you look at this chart, it's pretty simple, isn't it? It's not that confusing, right? It's not that confusing. You can see that it's just showing us that for these 6 nouns, they all have alpha stems going across. These are the nominative forms. We add a sigma to make the genitive case for each one of them. We add iota subscript to make the dative case for each one of them. We add nu to make the accusative case for each one of them. And the vocative case is the same as the nominative case. So it's actually a very simple chart, all right? The only thing to watch out for that it shows us, the reason why there are 6 different examples is because we find some sneaky alphas and etas get in here, kind of randomly, it seems, right? Like this is glota, but then we have an eta in the ending. This is thalata, and we find some etas in here. And then in other ones, like moira, there's no etas. So you've just got to be careful. The reason why it gives us these 6 different nouns is because there are a couple places where eta replaces alpha, and you've got to be careful to keep your eye open for that, okay? Now, what I recommend you do to learn these, if you want to really learn the language and learn all these cases and things like that, the way that I learned them when I was studying is I would just take, you could do it on paper, but I used like a little whiteboard that I had, right? You can get a whiteboard for a couple bucks. I would just use a whiteboard, and I would just write them all out over and over and over again. I would keep writing them and writing them and writing them until I had them all memorized. And it's nice because you can just erase it. You don't have to use 700 pieces of paper to practice your memory work and write things out, okay? If you have, a computer or a tablet, you can do it right on a tablet. You can write it on the tablet, erase it, write it out, erase it, write it out, erase it. So if all you've got is paper, that's fine. You can use it. You can do it on paper. But I would just write them out and write them out and write them out until you could like wake up in the middle of the night and just write them out half asleep. Okay. Well, I really, that. Cecilia, that sounds like an idea, but just try to imagine that, right? Imagine writing them all out, erasing it all. I mean, if you'd like to do it that way, it's a free country, but I don't think that would work, okay? So anyway, write these forms out to memorize them, but we're just getting started though, so let's keep going. Remember that all of those forms, follow me here, all of those forms were singular forms, right? Singular. So there were singular forms of first declension nouns. All of that's singular. Pay attention. Follow me here. I don't want you to get lost as I go through this because you're chatting. Those are all singular. Now we move down to the second group and it says dual. Now this is something that's new in Greek that doesn't exist in Latin. In Latin, there's singular and plural number, right? So it's either one or more than one. But Greek is different because Greek has a separate number that's called the dual. What do you think the dual represents? What do you think the dual number is? Pairs, very good. 2, okay? So the Greek people, they recognized, remember we talked if you were in arithmetic with me, classical mathematics, we talked about the significance of numbers. The Greeks noticed that there were so many pairs of things in the natural world that the number 2 must be significant. So they treated pairs of things that come in twos, as a separate number in grammar. Okay, so we've got the singular, then we've got the dual for pairs, and then we've got the plural, which means more than 2. All right, the singular, the dual, and the plural. So if you look at the dual, you'll see we've got this wacky stuff over here, NAV. That just means nominative, accusative, vocative. So nominative, accusative, vocative, just abbreviated. So these 3 cases have the same forms. And then this second form is, it says GD for genitive and dative. Okay, so there's only 2 forms for the dual. This first form is used for the nominative, accusative, and vocative. This second form is used for the genitive and dative. So what do you notice about these first forms? The nominative, accusative, vocative, dual form. What do you notice about these forms in the first row? What do you notice about them? Are they just like the first nominative form? Are they just like the first nominative form? You guys are actually sharper than I expected. You got it. Yeah, they all end in alpha. Very good. They all end in alpha. Again, this is one of the signs that these are alpha stem nouns. Very good. Okay. So for the dual, the nominative, accusative, and vocative cases all end in alpha. All right. And then for the genitive and dative, what do you notice about that row? How do we recognize the dual number for the genitive and dative case? What's the mark? Iota nu. Very good. Iota nu. Very good. Iota nu. So you see this iota nu. So we have kora for the nominative, accusative, and vocative form. And then we have korain. Korain as the genitive and dative case. So again, lots of information on that screen, but once you understand what it's showing you, it's not complicated, okay? The dual forms are actually very easy to learn. It's just alpha and ein. That's all it is for the dual forms, okay? Then we go down to the plurals. So let's look at the plurals. On the left over here, it says n.v. What does that mean? What does n.v mean? What does n.v mean? Over on the left side of the, yeah, good. Okay, so it's for the nominative and the vocative. They're the same, right? So if we look across the nominative forms for the plural, if we look across the plural, how do we identify the plural? How do we identify the plural form for the first declension? Iota, very good, very good. So it's just iota. We have korai, nikai, fugai, moirai, glotai, thalatai. That's the nominative plural. All right, good. How about the genitive case? How do we identify the genitive case in the first declension? How do we identify the genitive case? Look at it carefully. How do we identify the genitive case? They're all the same. They're all exactly the same. It's omega nu, like Serena wrote there. Omega nu. Okay? Omega and nu at the end. Koron, nikon, fugon, moiron, gloton, thalaton. So That omega, nu, marks the genitive case plural. How about dative case? How do we identify the dative case plural? How do we identify the dative case? They're all the same. They're all the same. Look carefully, not just sigma. Well, you can say sigma if you compare it to the nominative here, but the ending is alpha iota sigma, right? The iota sigma at the end marks the dative plural. Chorais, chorais, nikais, fugais, moirais, glottais, and thalatais. So that iota sigma ending marks those. And then lastly, the accusative case. How do we identify accusative? I think Serena jumped the gun there. Yeah. Alpha sigma. Very good. Okay. Alpha sigma marks the accusative plural. So now you can look at that chart and you can say, okay, it looks confusing at first, but it's actually not that confusing. It's just showing us the different endings for the different cases and forms. And these are all first declension nouns. Okay, you got that? Now, I'm not asking you if you know it all now. I'm not asking if you can recognize all of those things immediately. Some of you may be, struggling to stay alive here as we go through this, but do you understand? This is what I want you to answer me, yes or no. Do you understand what this chart shows now? Now that we've walked through this chart, you see what this chart shows? Not asking if you know it all or if you understand it all, but do you see what the chart shows? Okay, good. Yeah, so you're going to have to study this in Greek grammar and learn it, but you understand what this chart shows. It's not something crazy. It's actually very simple. It's just giving us 6 different nouns as examples because sometimes there's a slight difference, but they're all members of one family, okay? So that's the first declension feminine nouns, the first declension alpha stem nouns, and this is in your Greek grammar book. And you've got these 6 examples: kora, nike, fuge, moira, glota, and thalata. All right. So let's do this now. Let's jump over into the reading. Let's jump over to the reading and we'll say, well, you know what? Are there any alpha stem nouns in this reading? Are there any examples of alpha stem nouns that we've seen? And the answer is yes. All right. Here's one right here. This word right here is exousia. Okay, and we can see that it ends in a nu. So we can see exousion, exousion, right? This word right here. It means power. He gave to them exousion. So we have this first declension noun and it ends in nu. Keep that in mind. It's a first declension noun and it ends in nu. So when we go back to this chart, it's a first declension noun that ends in nu. You see my cursor right there? What case is exousion? What case is exousion in our reading? It's accusative. Very good. Okay. It ends in nu. We see that nu right there. So we see that exousion in the reading, very good, is an accusative case. So when we go back to the reading, we see exousion. We know that it's an alpha stem noun, and we know that it ends in nu, so it's accusative case. Accusative singular. Now, if we go down to the exposition, we go down to verse 12 and look at exousion. I didn't list the case because we don't study that in Greek 1, but you'll see that exousion means power. And the Latin equivalent is potestatem. And if you know Latin, you'll know this is the accusative form of potestas, potestatem. All right. So we have exousia. We have an example of a first declension noun. Let's go back up here. So exousia is one example of a first declension noun. Let's look and see if there's any other. Probably is. Let's see. Here's one right here. Doxa. Doxa. What do you notice about doxa? Tell me a couple things you notice about doxa. The noun doxa in verse 14. It means glory, just so you know. Glory, like doxology is we sing glory to the Trinity. You wrote dopsan, Giovanni. Watch that consonant in the middle, you used psi instead of xi. Just be careful there. You wrote dopsan. It's doksan. That's dokhan, Giovanni. Now you put a chi instead of a xi. You have to get that xi right. It's mu. Yeah, very good. There you go. That's it. Okay, doksan. Very good. All right, so what do you notice about that form? What do you notice about that word? Let's find two important things about that word. What about the stem? What do you notice about the stem of that word? What do you notice about the stem of this word? It's an alpha stem. Okay, let's get that first. It's an alpha stem, so it's first declension. And what do you notice about the ending? What do you notice about the ending? Giovanni's gone Arabic on us. What do you notice about the ending? It ends in new, okay? It ends in new. It ends in new. So if we go back to our grammar, it's an alpha stem noun. Follow me here. It's an alpha stem noun and it ends in new. So doksan is another accusative case noun. Doksan is another accusative case, okay? And I think there's one more right here. Aletheas, aletheas. You can see that it's an alpha stem, right? Aletheas. I'm telling you it's an alpha stem. So if you look it up in the dictionary, you would look up aletheia. This means truth. This is the Greek word for truth, aletheia. But you see that it's aletheias, and it's got the sigma ending. All right, so it's a first declension noun. Follow me here, pay attention. It's a first declension noun, and it ends in alpha sigma. So let's look at our forms here. Aletheas, ending in alpha sigma. What case is it? Aletheas ends in alpha sigma. What case is it? Use the chart to help you. We've got a problem, right? We've got a problem here. I see two different answers. Why are you giving two different answers? What's the problem here? There's something that's the problem. What's the matter? There's something wrong here. Aletheas ends in alpha sigma. I ask, what case is it, looking at the chart, and I get two different answers. I get genitives and accusatives. Why am I getting genitives and accusatives? Who can tell me what's going on? Why I'm getting different answers? Why am I getting different answers? Are some of you wrong, or are both of you right? That's right. Good. Okay. So look, in the singular, up here in the singular forms, we see alpha sigma is the ending for the genitive case in the singular. So those of you who wrote genitive were right for the singular number. But if you look down to the plural, you can see alpha sigma is also the ending for the accusative case in the plural. So those of you who wrote accusative were right for the plural, right? So it could be genitive singular or it could be accusative plural. How would we ever know which it actually is? How would we figure that out? How would we figure that out? Context, very good. All right. So we would look at the sentence, and that we'd be able to see what the word is doing in the sentence. Now, this is why translation can be complicated, because there's actually more than one possible option for the translation, and a decision has to be made by a translator which form is actually the form there to be translated. So you can see, just because you know the forms, it doesn't necessarily mean you can translate it, because there still could be a number of different options of possible translations. And the context, you'd have to figure out what the context says, and you'd have to make a decision what you think the best translation would be. All right. So yeah, so we've got to be careful, because there could be more than one possible form, but you can see it's pretty simple. If we see the sigma at the end of an alpha stem noun, we know it's either genitive singular or accusative plural. Okay. Now let's look at our reading. The translation here, which we didn't go over yet, so you might not know this, it says pleres karitos kai aletheas. Pleres karitos kai aletheas. That means full of grace and of truth. Full of grace and of truth. Or we could just say full of grace, and we don't know how to translate this because there are two different forms. So what does the context tell us is the right case? Who can tell me what the context tells us is the right case? Is it genitive or is it accusative? Full of grace and aletheas. Should it be genitive or should it be accusative? You have to know some grammar to get this. So if you have no idea, it's okay. You haven't studied the grammar yet. Those of you who guessed genitive are right, all right? Because the genitive case is translated by of. All right, let me just write this. The genitive case is translated of whatever the noun is, okay? So if aletheia means truth, then aletheas means of truth. So when we see full of grace and aletheas, it means full of truth, okay? So that's good. And I think that's going to be the last one. Ioannes could be alpha stem. I'd have to check, though. I don't know that off the top of my head. Ioannes could be alpha stem, even though it has an eta, right? It could still be alpha stem. But I think that's it for this lesson. So you can see here, we got our first example of a couple alpha stem nouns. And so by studying grammar, we can start to understand more of what's going on, right? You don't just have to read the exposition and repeat it without any understanding. If we study Greek grammar, we'll start to understand the exposition more and more, and that's what I'd like you to do, okay? So we've got exousion is an example of an alpha stem noun in the accusative case. What else did we have? We had doxa. Where did doxa go? Right here, doxan is another example of an alpha stem noun in the accusative case. And then lastly, we had aletheas, another alpha stem noun, which ended in a sigma because it was in the genitive case, okay? So you can see that as you work through Greek grammar and learn the forms, you'll begin to understand in the Greek reading why the translation is what it is, all right? There's no way you're going to understand unless you study grammar. But that's how these two courses work together. So Greek reading, you can learn the vocabulary, you can just study the exposition and learn the translation. But in Greek grammar, you'll actually learn to understand why the translation is what it is, okay? So we looked at the first declension today. My advice for you, and again, I have to get lessons updated for Greek grammar because I only posted the first few lessons. Let me just take a look real quick. I just posted the first few lessons, and let me ask you as we look at this, we're running out of time here. If I look at Greek grammar, where's it at? Right here, 341. And I look at the lessons, you see we've got lesson 1 on the alphabet, lesson 2 on vowels and diphthongs, lesson 3 on breathings, lesson 4 on consonants, 5 on pronunciation, 6 on vowel changes. And the lessons that I've posted stop at lesson 6. Have any of you finished those first 6 lessons? Have any of you finished those first 6 lessons? Or if you haven't, what lesson are you currently working on? If you haven't even started yet, just say so. I'm not going to pick on you. I would just like to know. Have any of you finished any of these lessons yet? We've been focusing on reading. We've been focusing on reading. Okay, so it's okay. It's okay. Yeah, so it would be good for us to get started with Greek. Let me ask you this. How many of you have learned how to read the Greek words? Okay? And it's okay because like I said, these live classes are just meant to help you. Even if you're not working through the lessons, I mean, obviously you're not going to get credit for lessons, but it's still good to become familiar with it. How many of you can look at Greek words and read them? Okay, James can, Lara can a bit. Some words yes, some words no. All right. So what we'll do in future meetings, and I'd like you to remind me of this. Okay, I'd like you to remind me to spend more time working just on letting you guys practice reading. Okay. So in future lessons, we'll take some more time to practice reading until you can all read well. And we'll continue to learn some grammar little by little, and we'll continue to work with translation. But I would like you to enroll in that Greek grammar course and just start moving through the lessons little by little. Okay. It's a lot of stuff. I know there's a lot of studies available. But just move forward little by little. Now that we go over it in the live class meetings, when you look at these lessons, you'll say, oh, yeah, I remember when we talked about this in live class. I remember what this is about. So it'll help you to get through these lessons, okay? So if you want to, I recommend it. I recommend you get yourself into Greek grammar and just start working through these tasks. They're not difficult, okay? Reading is more important because you're learning vocabulary. That's right, Serena, okay? It is more important to focus on reading when you're getting started because you want to build the vocabulary. But once you get going a little bit, it's time to start studying grammar, okay? So you can understand what's going on in the language. And we'll just go through both of them. And I'll be patient with you because hardly any students in the whole world are even studying ancient Greek. So if I just have to walk with you slowly, I'm happy to do that. It's good for you guys to be learning about it. Even if you just become familiar with it, it's still very helpful. And maybe you'll do this later on. Most of you guys are still young. Give me your ages real quick. Tell me how old each of you are. Some of you are young. 13, 17, 10, 14. At least I thought you were writing that you're 20 years old. I got concerned there for a minute. I just saw 20. I said, what? So almost 13, 10, 17, 13, 10, 14, 13. All right. Yeah, 12. Okay. I didn't start studying Greek until I was like 19 years old. All right. So if you think of where you are, you're all younger than I was when I started studying Greek. So you've all got a head start on me. You already know more than I did when I was your age. So be encouraged. You're getting a head start. No, I wasn't. No, I started when I was 19 years old. Okay, so you guys, even if you're just barely getting started, you're still ahead of me when I was your age. So don't worry about not starting sooner or being busy with other studies. Even if you become familiar, it's good at your age. Okay. Yeah, you've disclosed your age. All right. So that's going to be all for today. We learned these first declension forms, and I encourage you to study these things and learn them. Become comfortable with this stuff. Keep working on Greek reading, like we said. That is the first priority. Work on Greek reading. Try to get these lessons done because, and this is serious, if you do all this work of coming to these classes, paying attention, participating in these classes, but don't do any of the lessons, in the end, you're not going to have anything to show for it. So make sure you work through these lessons, get the lessons done, get this stuff in your records so you can add all this to your transcripts in the future. Even if you don't get very far in these studies, you can still put them on your transcript because you can just say, like, I studied classical Greek. Did I study a whole year's worth? Well, no, but you can put a half credit on your transcript and say, I studied Greek for about the time of a half a year. So even if you make some progress, you can still get it on your transcript. And what's good about it is that it shows that you're willing to learn about things and study beyond what's necessary. And that's important. Okay. Lara, there's no reason you can't. How old are you again? Oh, sorry. Let me see how old you are, Lara. I feel like you're a little older than some of the students. Lara, how old was Lara? 13, man. So you've got lots of time. That's great. Okay. 5 years. You can easily be fluent in Greek. You can easily be fluent in Greek. Yeah, believe it or not, your age matters, you know? So 13, you've got at least 5 years left before you're even an adult. So yeah, I mean, I'm willing to continue these classes if God allows me to, as long as my life doesn't blow up or anything. Um, I'll continue. We'll just keep moving through things. So yeah, we'll take our time. Okay, so that's all for today. That's all for today. We went through some grammar, which I think was good. Introduced you to that first declension. Next week, we'll practice some reading together. We'll continue to work on these grammar lessons and keep working privately on your reading lessons, okay? Try to get the reading lessons done. They're not difficult. Try to keep getting those reading lessons done. Build your Greek vocabulary. So that's going to be all for today. And if you have any questions, I'll hang around and chat for a while, but I'm going to stop the recording here, stop sharing, and we'll just chat if there's anything you'd like to talk